Another one of our advanced lateral exercises is a turn on the haunches, which is a 180-degree turn on the haunches, which you can see is probably a better exercise than our turn on the forehand because it's a turn on the haunches and helps to shift the center of gravity back to the hind legs. Now, the turn on the haunches is a preliminary exercise to a more advanced lateral exercise called the walk pirouette. But you know how I like to put in a lot of baby steps, and one of the reasons that we do the turn on the haunches before we do the more advanced walk pirouette is that the turn on the haunches has all the good qualities of a walk pirouette, but it's a little bit easier for the horse. What I mean by good qualities is, number one, first and foremost, think of your training scale. The 4-beat rhythm of the walk is maintained. The other quality, the thing that makes the turn on the haunches an advanced lateral exercise, is that the horse has bend through his body. Remember our little equation, bend plus sideways equals engagement, and engagement refers to the bending of the joints of the hind legs. So as the hind legs bend, the horse lowers his croup and takes more weight behind, and the forehand becomes lighter and freer. So the turn on the haunches is easier for the horse to learn this turn and maintain the regularity, particularly of the walk, whereas if we started right away with a walk pirouette, chances are, because we haven't laid a foundation, the horse would take his inside hind leg and leave it on the ground and pivot around the inside hind leg, and therefore he's lost the rhythm of the walk, and that would be a very, very serious fault. So we start from the turn on the haunches to lay that foundation with the rhythm of the walk and maintaining the bend. And when you do turn on the haunches in competition, the hind legs are allowed to make a little bit of a circle, like the size of a large dinner platter. Later on, when you do the walk pirouette, the horse should pick up and put down the hind feet pretty much on the same spot, sort of like pistons going up and down. But in order to teach the young horse to preserve that rhythm of the walk, we start with a larger circle. So the aids, getting back to all the advanced lateral exercises, remember how they're all related. The aids start with the aids for a circle, your bending aid. So if I'm circling to the right, my weight's on the right seat bone, my right leg is on the girth, my left leg is positioned behind the girth to curve the back end of the horse around my inside leg. My inside hand asks for a little bit of flexion to the inside by turning the key in the lock, but I have to support with my outside rein, steady and supporting like a side rein to prevent the horse from over bending his neck, because I want that bend to be uniform from pole to tail. So I have my bending aids on, and once I have my bending aids on, the actual way that I will bring the horse around the turn is to use my two arms the same, and if you think about the hands of a clock, like the second hand of a clock sweeping around. So if I were doing a turn to the right, my right arm would come to the right, almost like an opening rein. It is an opening rein. So I would think right hand to the right of my right hip, and left hand comes as close to the withers without crossing over, of course, and I would sweep the forehand around the hind legs. Now, the sequence with which you put these aids on is important because, like I said, with the turn on the haunches, you're starting in a big walk. You're starting in a medium walk, and that's a little bit too big of a walk in order to be able to do the turn on the haunches. So the sequence of the aids is, first you take your medium walk, and you don't actually collect it, but you shorten the walk a little bit. Then you want your horse to start your turn on the haunches from a little shoulder 4 position. Remember, that's half of a shoulder in angle, for a couple of reasons. Number one, we know that if the horse is in shoulder 4, that he's engaging the inside hind leg and placing it under the heavy point of his body, rather than stepping to the side with it and avoiding taking weight on it. Also, think about it. If I start a right turn on the haunches in right shoulder 4, I've already got his forehand part of the way in the direction that I want to go. So the first thing I do is I shorten my medium walk. The second thing I do is step into a little shoulder 4, and then finally the two hands of the clock sweep the forehand around the turn, the 180-degree turn, maintaining my bend and maintaining the rhythm of the walk. So let's get back to that word bend again. If you remember from our haunches in, going down the long side, the way that we could tell that the horse was doing haunches in with true bend was to just look at the front end of the horse. And if you were just looking at the front end of the horse and something was blocking your vision from seeing what was going on behind the shoulders, this would not give you enough information for you to know if the horse was just going straight down the long side or was he in haunches in. Because the position of the forehand in a haunches in is exactly the same, straight through the body with a little bit of flexion at the pole to the inside. The position is exactly the same when you're going straight as it is in haunches in. Well, the same rule applies for your turn on the haunches and later on your pirouette. And so we start with an exercise so that we know that the horse is maintaining true bend through his body and not just displacing his hindquarters sideways in a leg yield. And it's very similar to that haunches in down the long side. But in this case, we're going to do haunches in on a small circle, maybe an 8 or a 10-meter circle. And we only do a few steps of each because if you don't have a ground person there, the most critical part of this exercise where you just walk on a, for example, 10-meter circle, do a few steps of haunches in, back to walking straight on the 10-meter circle, back to haunches in. The critical part is going back to straight. If your horse during the haunches in has straightened his body and his front feet and his shoulders are pointed a little bit toward the outside of the circle, in order to come back onto the arc of the circle, he has to swivel his forehand around. So that transition from the haunches in on the circle to just going straight on the circle tells you whether your horse has maintained his bend. And that's part of that's the primary thing with these advanced lateral exercises. We need to know that the horse maintains bend. So I'm just going to show you that little exercise here. I'm going to start on a 10-meter circle, and I'm going to think about my bending aids. I'm going to think about the horse looking a little bit to the right. I'm turning the key in the lock. I'm thinking about supporting with my outside rein so he doesn't overbend in his neck. My weight is on my inside seat bone. My inner leg is on the girth, and my outer leg is behind the girth. Those are the bending aids. Then, in order to ask his haunches to come in, I'm going to close my outside hand in a fist and give just a little squeeze with my outer leg. And I'm just going to do haunches in on this small circle for a few steps. Now the critical part, as I said before, is to go back to just walking on a 10-meter circle. If I didn't feel any difference in the position of his forehand when I went from the haunches in to back to the arc of the 10-meter circle, then I know that I've maintained good bend throughout the haunches in on the small circle. So here's our haunches in, and then as I just walk back onto the circle again, you can see that his forehand stays in exactly the same spot. Now I'm going to show it to you if it were done incorrectly. So I'm bending on the arc of a 10-meter circle, and let's ask his hindquarters to come in like I did before, but you see that his front feet and his shoulders are pointed out a little bit to the left, so he's really just doing a leg yield. Now watch what he has to do with his shoulders to come back on the circle. He has to swivel them back to the right. So that's the critical part of this exercise. As you teach both yourself the feel of maintaining bend as you ask your horse to bring the haunches in while you're keeping a regular rhythm. The important part is that the forehand stays on that original track of the circle, just like with our haunches in down the long side, that the forehand stays on the original track as if the horse was just going down the long side straight. So that I also like that exercise, this haunches in on a 10-meter circle, because if you define the size of your circle and you ask the haunches to come in and the horse starts to make the circle a little bit smaller, I'll demonstrate that now. What that means is that he's taking his right hind leg and stepping to the inside with it and avoiding carrying weight on the inside hind leg. So if you start on a 10-meter circle, when you do that exercise from haunches into straight, or just staying in haunches in on a circle, you want to be sure that you're staying on a 10-meter circle, that your horse is definitely not making the circle bigger, but what happens more often is that the horse makes the circle smaller, because rather than engaging the joints of the inside hind leg, he steps to the inside with the inside hind leg. And now I'm going to go straight. Good. And the forehand stayed on the same spot. And now I close my outer hand and leg while I keep my bending aids on. And then I go straight, and the forehand stays on the same spot. And we're on the same size circle. All critical things. Now, your turn on the haunches, if you're going to make a mistake because the rhythm is the priority, the rhythm and the bend, it's better to make it a little bit too big than to make it too small and lose your rhythm. So I start from a little shoulder 4 position, and I'm going to make it a little bit too big. And now right shoulder 4. And I sweep the hands of the clock around, and that was good. And I'm going to see in a moment, I'm just going to let him walk straight for a second because we've done a lot of little turns here. I'm going to see in a moment if I can make the circle that he makes with his hind legs a little bit smaller, but still maintaining the rhythm of the walk, the regular 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and also maintaining the bend. So I started in a medium walk. I'm going to shorten the walk a little bit. I'm in shoulder 4. And the same thing this way. Good. Now, sometimes your horse does one of two things with his hind legs to avoid the engagement of that inside hind leg. He either swings his haunches in or swings his haunches out. So you need to be able to control the position of the hind legs. So one thing, let's say we have a horse that likes to step to the inside with his inside hind leg in order to avoid engagement. An exercise I like to do is to just go 1 or 2 steps at the most around the turn and then leave the turn in a little shoulder 4 position. And then I do another 1 or 2 steps around, and then I leave the turn in a shoulder 4 position, no matter where I am in the ring. And this way, I know that I own, like I'm going to go in shoulder 4 now, I own that inside hind leg. And I come around another step, but then I head this way in shoulder 4. And then I come around another step, and I step this way in shoulder 4. And then coming around another step, and I come toward you in shoulder 4. And around another step, and I initiate the beginning of the shoulder 4 with an active inside leg and the direction that I'm looking. And this is a way, if you can easily step into your shoulder 4 position or even a shoulder in position, you know that you have control over that inside hind leg. If it's hard for you to step into shoulder 4, no matter where you are in the ring, then you don't own that inside hind leg. Now, let's talk about the other fault. The other fault is a horse that swings out with the hindquarters. And he ends up doing sort of what's called a turn on the middle instead of a turn on the haunches. If that's what your horse does, then you want to start your turn on the haunches from a little bit of haunches in position, so that you think about having the horse keep the hindquarters to the inside. Now, this is just a schooling exercise. This is not the correct way that you would ride a finished product, turn on the haunches. Definitely not the way you would come into it in competition, but it's just a schooling exercise. I'll show you, if I can, a turn on the middle first, where the horse swings to the outside with his hind legs, so that he sort of turns in the middle of his body rather than turning on his haunches. Okay, and that's because he's taking his outside hind leg and putting it to the outside. So in that case, I would come into my turn in a little bit of haunches in position and try to hold this haunches in position all the way around the turn, so that my horse, I know my horse isn't taking his right hind leg and stepping to the outside with it. So that's a good correction for a horse that swings the hindquarters to the outside and ends up doing a turn on the middle. But like I said, that's just a schooling exercise. You always want to come into your turn on the haunches from a shoulder fore position, so that you're engaging that inside hind leg. Now, this is a little bit beyond the scope of this Happy Horse Training series, but when you get ready to start to work on canter pirouettes, everything you just saw me do applies to the canter pirouettes. The way that you use your aids, because the canter pirouettes and the walk pirouettes, or this turn on the haunches, are very closely related. The way you use your aids, the way you come into the pirouette through a little bit of shoulder fore position, the way you need to keep the rhythm of the canter, bump, 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 3-beat canter, and the bend as you bring the horse's forehand around. And the correction for haunches coming in is come around a step, shoulder fore, come around a step, shoulder fore, come around a step, shoulder fore, so you know you own the inside hind leg. And the correction as a schooling exercise for swinging the hindquarters out is to practice some of those canter pirouettes, coming into them in a haunches in position. But don't forget also that preliminary exercise to make sure you really have been through the horse's body, and that's to go on a 10-meter circle and alternate from straight on a 10-meter circle, remember straight means bent, straight to a few steps of haunches in, straight, few steps of haunches in, all in the canter, but checking that the forehand doesn't have to swivel around to get back on that arc of the circle. It stays on the original track of the circle.